Nancy Drew stepped off the plane, a wave of heat and humidity washing over her. Florida. Even in February, the air hung heavy and sweet. She inhaled deeply, the scent of hibiscus and sunscreen, a stark contrast to the crisp winter air she'd left behind in River Heights. A smile tugged at her lips. A semester off school, a chance to visit her Aunt Eloise, and maybe, just maybe, escape the mysteries that seemed to follow her everywhere. Aunt Eloise, a petite woman with a warm smile and a twinkle in her eye, stood waiting by the baggage claim. She engulfed Nancy in a hug, her floral perfume filling Nancy's senses.
Nancy, darling, it's so good to see you. You've grown.
Nancy laughed, her earlier hope for a quiet visit already fading. Aunt Eloise was a librarian at the local high school, a notorious hotbed of gossip and intrigue. Nancy had a feeling her detective skills wouldn't be dormant for long. The drive to Aunt Eloise's cozy bungalow was a blur of vibrant colors and lush greenery. Palm trees swayed in the breeze, their fronds whispering secrets in the wind. Nancy gazed out the window, her mind already spinning with possibilities. Florida was a far cry from her hometown, a place teeming with unfamiliar faces and untold stories. As they pulled into the driveway, Aunt Eloise turned to Nancy, her expression unusually serious.
There's something I need to tell you, Nancy.
A shadow had fallen over the sunny paradise. Aunt Eloise explained, her voice filled with sadness, about Jake Rogers, a student at the high school where she worked. He had been found dead, the circumstances mysterious and unsettling. The police were investigating, of course, but whispers and rumors had already begun to spread like wildfire through the school and the town. Nancy listened intently, her detective instincts kicking in. Who was Jake Rogers? And what secrets had died with him?
The poor boy. He was a good student, quiet but well-liked. Everyone's shocked and scared. No one knows who could have done such a thing.
Nancy's mind raced, piecing together the scant information. A seemingly ordinary student, a sudden and tragic death, a community on edge. It was a recipe for a mystery, and Nancy Drew couldn't resist the urge to get involved.
Aunt Eloise, tell me everything.
Over a pot of steaming tea and a plate of freshly baked cookies, Aunt Eloise shared what little she knew. Jake Rogers, a senior at the high school, had been found dead near the library after school hours. The cause of death was still unknown, pending the results of an autopsy. The police were treating it as a homicide, but so far, they had no suspects. Aunt Eloise, her kind heart heavy with worry, feared that the killer might still be at large, a dangerous presence lurking among the students. Nancy listened intently, her mind absorbing every detail. A picture of Jake Rogers began to form in her mind, a young man with his whole life ahead of him, cut short by a senseless act of violence. She thought about the fear and uncertainty gripping the school and the town. Someone out there knew the truth about Jake's death, and Nancy was determined to find them. The thought sent a familiar thrill through her, a mix of apprehension and excitement. She was stepping into unknown territory, but one thing was certain. Nancy Drew was on the case.
Don't you worry, Aunt Eloise. I'll get to the bottom of this. I promise. I know you will, dear. But please, Nancy, be careful. This is real life and it can be dangerous.
Nancy nodded, her gaze steady. She knew the risks, but she wouldn't be deterred. She had a mystery to solve, and she wouldn't rest until justice was served. Her Florida adventure had just taken a dramatic turn, and she was ready for the challenge.
First things first. Tell me everything you know about Jake Rogers. His friends, his enemies, his routine. Everything.
Aunt Eloise, her initial fear giving way to a glimmer of hope, launched into a detailed account of Jake's life at Northgate High. As she listened, Nancy felt a familiar sense of purpose wash over her. The game was afoot, and she, Nancy Drew, was on the trail of a killer. The next morning, Nancy donned a crisp new uniform, a far cry from her usual attire, but necessary for her undercover operation. She felt a surge of nervous excitement as she approached the imposing facade of Northgate High. The Florida sun beat down, reflecting off the sprawling glass windows. Students milled about, their voices a low hum in the humid air. Taking a deep breath, Nancy steeled her nerves. She was no longer just Nancy Drew, visiting niece. She was now a student at Northgate High, on a mission to uncover the truth behind Jake Rogers' death. The school bustled with activity, a whirlwind of unfamiliar faces and teenage energy. Nancy navigated the crowded hallways, her eyes scanning for anyone who might be able to shed light on Jake Rogers' life. She overheard snippets of conversations, whispers of the murdered student, fear and suspicion coloring the words. It was clear that Jake's death had left a raw wound on the student body, a chilling reminder of their own mortality. Nancy located the library, her aunt's familiar presence a welcome sight amidst the chaos. Aunt Eloise, her face etched with concern, slipped Nancy a hall pass and a knowing look.
Be careful, Nancy, and good luck.
Armed with her aunt's blessing and her own sharp instincts, Nancy plunged headfirst into the labyrinthine world of Northgate High, determined to uncover the secrets hidden within its walls. The air crackled with anticipation as Nancy entered the bustling cafeteria, her senses overwhelmed by the cacophony of lunchtime chatter and the aroma of greasy fries. She scanned the crowded room, her eyes searching for a familiar face amidst the sea of unfamiliar teenagers. It was then that she spotted him. Daryl Gray, his blonde hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by a gaggle of admirers. He was even more strikingly handsome in person than Aunt Eloise had described. A golden boy, seemingly untouched by the tragedy that had befallen their school.
The one and only, and you are.
Gathering her courage, Nancy approached Daryl, her heart pounding in her chest. Nancy, excuse me, you're Daryl Gray, right? Daryl turned, his blue eyes widening in surprise as they met Nancy's. A slow smile spread across his face, revealing a dimple in his left cheek.
The one and only. And you are... Nancy Drew. I'm new here. Nancy Drew. That's a name I won't soon forget. So, what brings you to Northgate High, Nancy Drew? Nancy, just looking for a fresh start.
Nancy, acutely aware of the curious stares of Daryl's entourage, decided to play it cool. This was her chance to get close to Daryl, to learn what he knew about Jake Rogers. As Nancy delved deeper into the social hierarchy of Northgate High, she quickly realized that Daryl Gray was more than just a pretty face. He was the school's golden boy, the student council president, the son of a prominent politician. Everyone seemed to know his name, to speak of him in hushed tones of admiration or envy. But beneath the surface of Daryl's charm, Nancy sensed a guardedness, a carefully constructed facade that hinted at something darker lurking beneath. Whispers followed Daryl like a shadow, rumors of a troubled past, a family shrouded in scandal. Nancy overheard snippets of conversations, whispers of illegal dealings, of a father's fall from grace, of Daryl's desperate attempts to outrun his family's legacy. She couldn't shake the feeling that Daryl knew more about Jake Rogers' death than he was letting on, that his carefully crafted persona hid a secret that could shatter the fragile peace at Northgate High. One afternoon, as Nancy lingered near Daryl's locker, hoping to catch him alone, she overheard a particularly intriguing conversation. Two students, their voices hushed with fear, spoke of Daryl's involvement with a shady character named Mitch Dillon, a man rumored to have connections to the criminal underworld. Nancy's pulse quickened. Could this Mitch Dillon be the key to unraveling the mystery surrounding Jake Rogers' death? Determined to learn more about Daryl's connection to Mitch Dillon, Nancy decided to take a risk. She waited until after school, when the hallways had emptied and the air was thick with the silence of secrets kept. As Daryl lingered by his locker, gathering his belongings, Nancy approached him, her heart pounding in her chest. Nancy. Daryl. I need to talk to you. It's about Jake. Daryl spun around, his blue eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, a flicker of fear crossed his face, quickly masked by his usual charm.
Jake? What about him? Nancy, I know you know more than you're letting on. I've heard the rumors about you, about your family, about Mitch Dillon.
Daryl's carefully constructed composure cracked.
You need to stay out of this, Nancy. This is dangerous territory. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Nancy, maybe not. But I'm going to find out.
She turned to leave, her mind racing with the implications of Daryl's veiled threat. She had stumbled upon a dangerous secret, one that someone was willing to kill to protect. Nancy's next target was Connie Watson. Aunt Eloise had described her as a tough girl, a bit of a loner with a sharp tongue and a rebellious streak. Nancy found Connie in the student lounge, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, her eyes glued to a thick textbook. She was surrounded by an invisible force field, a palpable aura of "don't mess with me" that kept other students at bay.
Don't know you. What do you want?
Nancy, refusing to be intimidated, pressed on.
I'm Nancy. Nancy Drew. I'm new here, and I was hoping you could give me the lay of the land.
Connie eyed Nancy's outstretched hand for a moment. Then, with a shrug, she returned to her textbook.
Don't need a guide. Figure it out yourself.
Nancy, undeterred, decided to take a different tack. She noticed a worn Judo guy bag slung over the back of Connie's chair.
That's a cool bag. Are you into Judo?
Connie finally looked up, a flicker of interest in her eyes.
What's it to you?
Just curious. I've always been interested in martial arts. What belt are you?
Connie's guard seemed to lower slightly, replaced by a hint of pride.
Black belt, 2nd degree.
Nancy's eyebrows shot up in surprise.
Wow, that's amazing. You must be really good.
Connie, seemingly pleased by the compliment, allowed a small smile to play at the corners of her lips. It was the first time Nancy had seen her soften her tough girl facade, and it gave her a glimpse of the vulnerability hidden beneath Connie's prickly exterior. This was her chance to gain Connie's trust, to learn what she knew about Jake Rogers.
So, do you compete? Any big tournaments coming up?
Connie's smile vanished, replaced by a look of guarded unease. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around the room as if checking for eavesdroppers.
Not really, it's just a hobby.
But Nancy had seen a flash of something in Connie's eyes, a flicker of fear or guilt that belied her nonchalant tone. She was hiding something important.
Come on. Everyone has secrets, Connie. Maybe I can help.
Connie's eyes narrowed, her gaze fixed on Nancy's. For a long moment, she said nothing, her silence heavy with unspoken words. Then, with a sigh of resignation, she leaned closer to Nancy, her voice barely a whisper.
You can't tell anyone. It's not what you think.
I promise. I won't tell a soul.
Connie took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for a confession.
I'm not supposed to be competing. The tournament, it's for guys only. The prize money is way better, and I need the money for college.
Nancy listened intently, her mind racing. Connie? A talented athlete forced to hide her true potential because of an outdated rule? It was an injustice. But how did it connect to Jake Rogers?
So you competed under a different name?
Connie nodded, her face pale.
I had to. If they found out I was a girl, they'd disqualify me. I won, of course. I was the best one there, but...
Her voice trailed off, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and fear.
But Jake found out, didn't he?
Connie's eyes widened in alarm.
How did you...
Nancy silenced her with a gentle hand on her arm.
It's okay. I'm getting closer to the truth. Did Jake blackmail you, Connie? Is that why he's dead?
Connie's shoulders slumped, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. She nodded miserably.
He saw me take off my mask after the final match. He had it all on video. He said he'd expose me unless...
She hesitated, her face flushing crimson.
Unless what, Connie?
Connie took a shaky breath, her eyes downcast.
He made me go out with him. Said it was part of the deal. I had no choice. I had to protect my secret.
Nancy felt a surge of anger towards Jake Rogers. This wasn't just about blackmail anymore. This was about control. About exploiting someone's vulnerability for personal gain. Jake had crossed a line, and someone had made him pay the ultimate price. But who? And why? Nancy's mind raced, connecting the dots. Jake Rogers, the seemingly ordinary student, was revealed to be a master manipulator, preying on the secrets and vulnerabilities of his classmates. But his web of deceit had been unraveled by his untimely demise, leaving behind a trail of fear, suspicion, and a burning desire for revenge. Now, with Daryl Gray's shady connections and Connie Watson's desperate secret brought to light, the stakes were higher than ever. Nancy realized she was dealing with something far more complex and dangerous than she could have imagined. The deeper she delved into the mystery of Jake Rogers' death, the more she realized that everyone at Northgate High had something to hide. The question was, who was hiding the most? As Nancy thanked Connie for confiding in her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had only scratched the surface of a much larger conspiracy. The truth, she knew, lay buried beneath layers of secrets and lies, guarded by those who had the most to lose. And she, Nancy Drew, was determined to unearth it, no matter the cost. The clock was ticking, and every passing moment brought her closer to unmasking a killer. Hal Tanaka was a puzzle, a quiet observer in a school teeming with boisterous personalities. Aunt Eloise had described him as a brilliant student, a bit of a loner, always buried in his books. Nancy found him in the library, hunched over a mountain of textbooks, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was surrounded by an aura of intense focus, a silent intensity that seemed at odds with the carefree atmosphere of the school. Nancy hesitated, reluctant to interrupt his studies. But she had a job to do, and Hal, she suspected, held a piece of the puzzle. Gathering her courage, she approached him cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the soft carpet. Nancy. "Hi, Hal." She greeted him softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Hal looked up, startled, his dark eyes blinking rapidly behind his thick glasses. He seemed surprised to see her, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance.
"Can I help you? Nancy, I hope so. I'm Nancy Drew. I'm new here, and I was hoping you could tell me a little about Jake Rogers."
Hal's demeanor shifted subtly, his shoulders stiffening slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He closed his textbook slowly, marking his place with a well-worn bookmark.
"Jake Rogers? What about him?"
Nancy studied Hal's reaction, her detective instincts tingling. She sensed a guardedness in his demeanor, a reluctance to discuss Jake that hinted at something more than just casual acquaintance. She decided to tread carefully, choosing her words with precision. "Nancy, I know this is a difficult time for everyone, but I'm trying to piece together what happened to Jake. Any information you could share would be helpful." Hal hesitated for a moment, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Nancy's shoulder. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully, torn between a desire to help and a fear of revealing too much.
"Jake and I, we weren't close friends, but we had a few classes together. He was intense, driven, always seemed to be under a lot of pressure. Nancy? Pressure? What kind of pressure?"
Hal's gaze dropped to his hands, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his textbook.
"He was determined to get a scholarship. Said his family was counting on him. He couldn't afford to mess up. Nancy. And did he? Mess up, I mean."
Hal's head snapped up, his eyes widening in alarm.
I don't know what you mean."
He stammered, his voice tinged with panic. He gathered his books hastily, his movements jerky and uncoordinated.
"I have to go."
He mumbled, pushing past Nancy and hurrying out of the library, leaving a trail of unanswered questions in his wake. Nancy watched Hal go, her mind racing. There was more to Hal's story than he was letting on, she was sure of it. The intensity of his reaction, the fear in his eyes, spoke volumes. But what was he hiding? And how did it connect to Jake Rogers? She decided to do some digging. She found Hal's student file in the school's computer system. A model student, top of his class, a shoo-in for a full scholarship to any university in the country. But something didn't add up. Nancy noticed a discrepancy in his academic record, a sudden dip in his grades in his junior year, followed by an almost superhuman effort to catch up. Nancy delved deeper, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She accessed the school's online plagiarism detection software, her suspicions growing with each passing moment. And then she found it. A match. An essay submitted by Hal Tanaka, identical to a passage from a book in the library's rare books collection. A wave of realization washed over Nancy. Hal, the brilliant scholar, had cheated. But why? And what did Jake Rogers have to do with it? She found the answer in a series of emails between Hal and Jake, recovered from the school's deleted files. The emails painted a picture of desperation, of a young man cracking under the weight of his family's expectations, willing to do anything to succeed. Jake, it seemed, had discovered Hal's secret and had used it to his advantage, blackmailing him into doing his homework, writing his papers, even taking his exams. Nancy stared at the computer screen, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Hal, driven to the brink by Jake's relentless blackmail, had snapped. He had confronted Jake, a heated argument had ensued, and in a moment of blind rage, Hal had struck out, killing Jake accidentally. But something wasn't right. Nancy couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, a vital piece of the puzzle that refused to fit. Hal's reaction in the library, his fear, his desperation, it seemed out of proportion to the crime he had committed. And then it hit her. Hal hadn't killed Jake. He was protecting someone he cared about deeply. But who? And why? Nancy leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Hal's secret, she realized, was only the tip of the iceberg. The truth, she suspected, ran much deeper, entangled in a web of lies, betrayal, and hidden agendas. And she, Nancy Drew, was determined to unravel it, no matter the cost. The game was afoot, and the stakes had just gotten higher. Hulk Sanchez. Even his name commanded attention. Aunt Eloise had described him as a force of nature, a star athlete with a promising future. Nancy found him on the football field, his muscular frame a blur of motion as he powered through drills. He moved with a grace and intensity that belied his imposing size, a natural athlete born to dominate the gridiron. Nancy watched from the sidelines, her gaze drawn to Hulk's every move. He was a study in contrasts, a gentle giant off the field, a fierce competitor when the game was on the line. But beneath his confident exterior, Nancy sensed a vulnerability, a hint of uncertainty that clouded his bright future. She had learned from Aunt Eloise that Hulk's dreams of a college scholarship, of playing professional football, were hanging by a thread. A recent injury had sidelined him, jeopardizing his chances of impressing college scouts. Rumors swirled about Hulk's desperation, whispers of risky shortcuts and dangerous alliances. Nancy suspected that Hulk's secret, whatever it was, held a crucial piece of the puzzle. As practice ended, Hulk lingered on the field, his shoulders slumped, his usual exuberance replaced by a weary resignation. Nancy seized the opportunity, approaching him cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the soft grass.
Hi, Hulk.
She greeted him softly, her voice barely audible above the distant cheers from the baseball diamond.
Hey there, what brings you down here?
Hulk turned, his brow furrowed in surprise as he recognized Nancy. He had seen her around school, a new face in the crowd, but they had never spoken.
What's on your mind?
I'm Nancy Drew, she introduced herself, offering him a friendly smile. I'm new here, and I was hoping to get your take on something. Hulk's expression softened slightly, a flicker of warmth replacing the guarded look in his eyes. He had always been a friendly guy, approachable despite his imposing physique. But lately, the pressure of his uncertain future had cast a shadow over his usually sunny disposition.
What's on your mind?
He asked, his voice tinged with a hint of suspicion. He had learned to be wary of strangers, of prying eyes and probing questions. "I'm trying to learn more about Jake Rogers," Nancy explained, her tone sincere and non-threatening. "His death, it's shaken everyone up. I was hoping you could tell me a little about him." Hulk's demeanor shifted subtly, his shoulders stiffening slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze darting around the empty field as if checking for eavesdroppers.
Jake and I, we weren't exactly friends. He was different. Kept to himself mostly.
"But you knew him?" Nancy pressed, sensing Hulk's reluctance to reveal too much.
We had a few classes together, but that's about it.
Nancy studied Hulk's reaction, her detective instincts tingling. His body language screamed discomfort, his words carefully chosen to deflect her questions. She knew he was hiding something important. But what? And how did it connect to Jake Rogers? She decided to take a different approach, appealing to Hulk's competitive spirit. "I've heard you're quite the football star," she said, her tone light and conversational. "Must be tough, balancing school and practice and everything." Hulk's eyes lit up for a moment, a flicker of his usual enthusiasm breaking through his guarded facade. Football was his passion, his escape from the pressures of his everyday life.
It's all about dedication. You gotta want it bad enough to put in the work.
"And you definitely have the talent," Nancy agreed, her tone sincere. "But I've also heard rumors. Rumors about your injury, about you maybe not being able to play anymore." Hulk's face fell, the light in his eyes dimming as the weight of his uncertain future settled back upon his shoulders.
It's just a minor setback. I'll be back on the field in no time.
"But what if you're not?" Nancy pressed gently, her voice filled with concern. "What if the injury is worse than you're letting on? What if you have to give up your dream?" Hulk's gaze dropped to the ground, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her words. He had tried to ignore the doubts, to push them aside and focus on his recovery. But deep down, he knew that his future hung in the balance.
I'd do anything to get back on that field. Football, it's all I've ever known. It's my ticket out of here, my chance to make something of myself.
Nancy's heart went out to Hulk. She understood his passion, his drive to succeed, but she also sensed that his desperation had led him down a dangerous path. "What did you do, Hulk?" she asked softly, her voice filled with compassion. "What did you do to get back in the game?" Hulk hesitated for a moment, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Nancy's shoulder. He seemed to be wrestling with an internal battle, torn between his desire to confide in someone and his fear of the consequences.
It started out small, just a few pills, something to help me manage the pain. But then it became more than that. I needed to be better, stronger, faster. I needed an edge.
"And Jake Rogers, he provided that edge?" Nancy asked, piecing together the puzzle. Hulk nodded miserably, his face pale.
He had connections, said he could get me anything I needed, but it came with a price. He wanted me to do things for him, things I'm not proud of.
Nancy listened intently, her mind racing. Hulk, desperate to salvage his future, had fallen prey to Jake Rogers' manipulations, drawn into a web of deceit and blackmail. But what had Jake forced him to do? And how had it led to his death? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the empty football field, Nancy realized that the truth was far more complicated than she could have imagined. She had stumbled upon a tangled web of secrets, each one more shocking than the last. And she had a feeling that the most disturbing revelations were yet to come. Nancy's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of information she had gathered. Each student, each story, was a thread in a complex tapestry of secrets, lies, and desperate acts. Jake Rogers, the puppet master, had been pulling the strings, exploiting the vulnerabilities of his classmates for his own gain. But who had cut those strings, silencing him permanently? She thought about Daryl, haunted by his family's past, drawn into a dangerous alliance with Mitch Dillon. Connie, her talent hidden in the shadows, forced to compromise her integrity to protect her dreams. Hal, the weight of expectations crushing his spirit, resorting to desperate measures to salvage his future. And Hulk, his body betraying him, his dreams slipping away, willing to pay any price to regain his former glory. Each of them had a motive, a reason to silence Jake Rogers. But which one had been pushed too far? Whose anger, whose fear, had finally boiled over, leading to a fatal confrontation? Time was running out. Nancy could feel the urgency of the situation, the sense that the killer was growing bolder, more desperate. She had to act fast before another life was lost, before the truth was buried forever. Nancy knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed help, someone she could trust, someone who understood the dangers she faced. Her gaze fell on her phone, her finger hovering over Daryl's number. He was her best lead, the one person who seemed to have both the motive and the means to have silenced Jake. But Daryl was also deeply entangled in this web of secrets, his loyalties uncertain, his actions unpredictable. Could she trust him to help her, knowing he might be the one she was trying to expose? Nancy took a deep breath, her finger finally pressing down on the call button. She had to take the risk. Daryl, for all his flaws, was her best chance at uncovering the truth. And besides, she had a plan, a risky gamble that just might flush out the killer and expose their true colors.
Nancy, this is dangerous. You're playing with fire. You need to let the police handle this.
There's no time, Nancy insisted, her voice firm with conviction. The killer is getting away with murder, and I won't let that happen. Will you help me or not?
Where do you want me to be?
The trap was set. Nancy, with Daryl and Connie's reluctant help, had lured Mitch Dillon to the school's abandoned gymnasium, a desolate space haunted by the echoes of past victories and defeats. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the rhythmic thud of a basketball bouncing on the hardwood floor. Mitch Dillon, a hulking figure shrouded in shadows, stood in the center of the court, his face a mask of anger and confusion. He had been expecting a meeting with Daryl, a chance to settle their differences, to tie up loose ends. He hadn't expected this. Nancy Drew, her eyes blazing with righteous fury, confronting him with the weight of his crimes.
It was you, wasn't it? You killed Jake Rogers?
You're out of your depth, girlie. You don't know what you're talking about.
Don't I? Nancy challenged, her voice unwavering. I know about your drug operation, your hold on Daryl, your threats against Jake. He knew too much, and you couldn't let him expose you.
You've got nothing on me. This is just a lot of hot air and wild accusations.
Is it? Nancy countered, gesturing towards the shadows at the edge of the court. Tell that to the police, Mitch. They've heard it all.
What the?
Mitch whirled around, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw the police officers emerge from the shadows, their badges glinting under the dim lights. He had been played, outsmarted by a teenage girl and her ragtag team of amateur detectives.
No, this can't be happening.
Panic flashed across Mitch's face as he realized the futility of his situation. He was trapped, cornered, with no escape. His carefully constructed empire of lies and intimidation crumbled around him as the police closed in, their handcuffs glinting under the dim lights.
You don't understand.
As Mitch was read his rights, his face a mask of rage and defeat, Nancy felt a surge of satisfaction, a sense of justice served. She had faced her fears, confronted a killer, and emerged victorious. But her work wasn't finished. There were still loose ends to tie up, wounds to heal, lives to rebuild.
Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't.
Daryl, his face pale but resolute, approached Nancy, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and shame. Nancy Drew. It's over now. You can start over, build a new life, free from the shadows of the past. As the police car carrying Mitch Dillon disappeared into the night, Nancy felt a sense of closure, a feeling of peace settling over her. The Florida mystery was solved, the killer brought to justice. But for Nancy Drew, the adventure was far from over. A new case awaited her, a fresh puzzle to unravel, a new challenge to embrace. Her bags were packed, her plane ticket booked. New York City, with all its secrets and intrigue, beckoned. The game was afoot, and Nancy Drew was ready to play. The air was thick with a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The halls of Northgate High, once buzzing with whispers of suspicion and fear, were now quiet, the students still reeling from the revelations of the past few days. The weight of Jake Rogers' death, the secrets he had held, still lingered, but a sense of normalcy was slowly returning. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the freshly polished floors, a promise of brighter days to come. Nancy watched as students passed by, their faces a mix of curiosity and relief. Some offered her shy smiles, their eyes filled with a newfound respect for the quiet girl who had cracked the case that had baffled even the most seasoned detectives. Others kept their distance, their expressions guarded, still haunted by the darkness that had gripped their school. She saw Connie in the hallway, her head held high, a newfound confidence in her stride. Their eyes met, and a small smile touched Connie's lips, a silent acknowledgement of their shared ordeal, of the bond forged in the face of adversity. Hal, she heard, had been offered a second chance, his academic future salvaged by a compassionate dean who recognized the pressure he had been under. He was still working through the guilt and shame of his actions, but he was on the road to redemption. Daryl, his face etched with a mixture of relief and regret, had severed ties with Mitch Dillon, his father's debts settled, his conscience clear. He was rebuilding his life, piece by piece, determined to create a future free from the shadows of the past. As Nancy watched him go, a pang of sympathy resonated within her. Daryl, despite his mistakes, had been a pawn in a dangerous game, manipulated by forces beyond his control. She hoped he would find the peace and happiness he deserved. Nancy stood on the beach, the warm Florida sand between her toes, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt air and freedom. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple, a breathtaking spectacle that mirrored the turmoil of emotions swirling within her. The past few days had been a whirlwind of investigation, danger, and difficult choices. She had faced her fears, confronted a killer, and brought justice to a community terrorized by secrets and lies. But the experience had taken its toll, leaving her emotionally drained, her spirit weary. She thought about the people she had met, the lives she had touched, the secrets she had uncovered. Jake Rogers, the manipulative mastermind, had cast a long shadow over Northgate High. His presence felt even in death. But with his passing came an opportunity for healing, for growth, for a fresh start. Nancy knew that the scars of the past would linger, that the wounds inflicted by betrayal, deceit, and loss would take time to heal. But she also knew that the human spirit was resilient, capable of overcoming even the darkest of times. A new dawn was breaking over Northgate High, a chance for the students and faculty to rebuild their lives, to create a future free from the weight of Jake Rogers' manipulations. And Nancy, her heart heavy but hopeful, was ready to move on, to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The phone rang, shattering the peaceful silence of Aunt Eloise's cozy living room. Nancy, curled up on the sofa with a cup of tea and a well-worn copy of The Secret Garden, glanced at the caller ID. It was her father, his voice laced with concern as he inquired about her well-being, about the recent events in Florida.
I'm fine, Dad, Nancy assured him, a smile creeping onto her lips. It's over now. The case is closed.
Are you sure you're all right, Nancy? Her father pressed, his voice still laced with worry. This sounds like it was a lot to handle.
I'm tougher than I look, Dad, Nancy chuckled, her voice laced with affection. Besides, I had some help. And I learned a lot. About myself, about the world, about the importance of facing your fears and fighting for what's right.
I'm proud of you, Nancy, her father said, his voice softening. You're a remarkable young woman.
Thanks, Dad, Nancy replied, her heart warmed by his words. I'll be home soon. But first, I have one more stop to make.
The bright lights of New York City twinkled below, a dazzling tapestry of energy and ambition. Nancy Drew, her trusty backpack slung over her shoulder, stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal, a familiar surge of excitement coursing through her veins. The Florida mystery, with all its twists and turns, was behind her. Now, a new adventure awaited, a fresh puzzle to solve, a new cast of characters to meet. Her phone buzzed with a message from her friend, Bess Marvin, her words filled with anticipation for their upcoming reunion. The city that never sleeps was calling, and Nancy Drew, amateur sleuth extraordinaire, was ready to answer. She had faced down a killer, exposed a web of deceit, and brought justice to a community in turmoil. She was ready for anything. As she hailed a taxi, her gaze fixed on the shimmering skyline, Nancy couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The world was full of mysteries, waiting to be unraveled, and she, Nancy Drew, was determined to solve them all.